For centuries, the Ottoman Empire stood as one of the world's greatest powers, but behind its legendary armies and glorious victories lay a hidden cost that few dared to confront. A cost that didn't just drain gold from the treasury, but slowly bled the empire from the inside. This is the untold financial story of an empire built on conquest, yet undone by the very wars that once made it unstoppable. If you've ever wondered how a superpower collapses, not in a single moment, but through a slow, silent economic erosion, this journey will reveal the truth. For 600 years, the Ottoman Empire existed in a world where peace was never permanent. Borders shifted like desert sands, and every frontier required soldiers, fortresses, and endless supplies. At first, war fueled expansion, filling the treasury with tribute and spoils. But as the centuries passed, campaigns grew longer, weapons became costlier, and enemies more organized. The empire's financial system, designed for a medieval world, struggled to sustain modern conflict. Revenues fluctuated wildly while military expenses climbed without limit. By the 17th century, the Ottomans were spending more on simply maintaining their borders than they once spent conquering entire kingdoms. The empire that thrived on warfare found itself trapped in a cycle where victory and survival both demanded money it no longer had. The Ottoman military was once the envy of the world. Elite janissaries, powerful cavalry, and fleets that controlled the Mediterranean. But maintaining a full-time professional army required staggering amounts of money. Salaries, equipment, food, horses, barracks, and weapons consumed the budget year after year. As firearms became essential, costs multiplied even further. Ammunition, gunpowder, and imported metals strained the treasury like never before. The Janissaries, originally disciplined and loyal, turned into a political force demanding higher pay and privileges. Mutinies erupted whenever wages were delayed. The army that once guaranteed the empire's future slowly transformed into a financial burden too heavy to carry. By the 18th century, nearly half of state revenue went directly to military expenses, an impossible ratio for long-term survival. For centuries, Ottoman finances depended on one strategy: conquer new lands, and let those lands pay for the next war. But when expansion slowed after the 16th century, the system broke almost instantly. No new conquests meant no new revenue streams, yet military spending continued to rise. The empire was suddenly forced to depend on taxes from older provinces, many of which were already poor or in rebellion. Without fresh income from newly conquered territories, the Ottoman budget developed chronic deficits. Administrators attempted desperate measures: harsh taxation, selling government offices, and squeezing peasants until they could give no more. Instead of stabilizing the treasury, these policies triggered economic decline across the empire. What once was a profitable cycle of conquest had become a downward spiral of shrinking income and rising expenses. The Janissaries were initially the backbone of the Ottoman military, a disciplined force trained from childhood, loyal only to the Sultan. But by the 17th century, the core had transformed into a politically powerful group capable of overthrowing rulers. Each uprising carried a heavy financial cost: burned palaces, destroyed arsenals, halted trade, and months of instability. Sultans paid enormous bribes to secure loyalty, while new privileges and tax exemptions drained revenue further. The Janissaries fought modernization, resisting new military systems that could have reduced expenses. As their numbers swelled far beyond military necessity, salaries grew uncontrollably. What began as an elite force designed for efficiency became a bloated institution consuming the empire's future. The financial wounds caused by internal revolts were often more damaging than external wars. While Europe rapidly modernized its banking and credit systems, the Ottomans clung to outdated financial models. Instead of establishing national banks or long-term credit mechanisms, the state relied on short-term solutions and emergency levies. Wars requiring millions of coins had to be funded through borrowed money from merchants, religious endowments, or foreign lenders. Interest payments piled up, creating a cycle where loans were taken simply to repay previous loans. Without a central financial institution to regulate currency or manage debt, inflation became a constant threat. Counterfeit coins, debased currency, and unstable tax systems crippled the economy. By the time the Ottomans attempted reforms, European powers had already built financial empires capable of sustaining long and expensive wars, something the aging empire could no longer match. As military and administrative costs skyrocketed, the Ottoman government turned to the only immediate solution available: the people. Taxes multiplied on land, livestock, trade, and even daily necessities. Poor peasants, already struggling under the weight of war disruptions, faced collectors who demanded impossible sums. Corruption flourished as tax farming allowed wealthy individuals to buy the right to collect taxes and keep most of the revenue. Entire regions collapsed economically as farmers abandoned their lands or joined rebellions. Rather than increasing income, excessive taxation reduced productivity and drove the population deeper into poverty. The more the empire needed money, the less it earned. By the 18th century, the tax system had become a financial trap, punishing the economy it was meant to support. By the mid-19th century, the Ottoman Empire was financially cornered. Modern wars required modern financing, and the empire had neither. Forced to look outward, the Ottomans turned to European banks for massive loans. At first, the money offered relief. Debts were paid, armies equipped, and reforms initiated. But each loan came with heavy interest, harsh conditions, and foreign oversight. Within decades, most of the empire's revenue was locked into perpetual debt payments. The financial independence of a once mighty empire eroded as European creditors gained influence over taxes, trade, and even internal policies. This foreign dependency marked the final stage of financial decline, not a collapse caused by war alone, but by the inability to fund war without surrendering control. Throughout the 19th century, wars with Russia, rebellions in the Balkans, and conflicts across the empire drained the treasury faster than ever before. Unlike earlier conquests, these wars brought no spoils, only devastation. Railways, factories, and modern infrastructure were never fully developed because funds were constantly diverted to the battlefield. Each conflict required borrowing more money at higher interest rates, pushing the empire deeper into insolvency. The Crimean War alone cost more than the empire could repay in decades. Instead of rebuilding the economy, post-war years were spent negotiating debt and paying foreign creditors. The age of profitable conquest was over. The age of expensive survival had begun. As Europe embraced industrialization, global trade routes changed forever. Manufactured goods replaced traditional products, and nations with strong industries dominated world markets. The Ottomans, however, remained dependent on raw materials and agriculture. Their exports earned little, while imported goods from Europe flooded local markets. This trade imbalance drained gold and silver from the empire, worsening financial instability. Attempts to industrialize were hampered by debt, political resistance, and lack of capital. While European rivals built economic empires, the Ottomans clung to outdated structures. The global economy shifted like a tide, and the empire found itself unable to swim against it. As financial pressure increased, corruption spread through every level of administration. Tax collectors kept more than they delivered. Provincial governors enriched themselves while villages starved. Military officers inflated troop numbers to claim extra salaries. Bribes became essential for basic government functions. This corruption was not just moral decay, it was a financial disaster. Money meant for the army, infrastructure, or debt payments vanished before reaching its destination. Reforms struggled to take hold because those benefiting from corruption sabotaged them at every turn. A system meant to manage an empire became a machine feeding on its own wealth. In the Tanzimat era, the Ottomans finally attempted large-scale reforms: modern schools, updated tax structures, new armies, and administrative changes. On paper, these reforms promised a stronger empire. In practice, they required enormous amounts of money the state no longer had. Borrowed funds sustained the reform movement temporarily, but interest payments soon erased any progress. Without stable revenue, even well-designed reforms failed. The empire was trying to rebuild itself while drowning in debt. Innovation became a luxury. Survival became the priority. And in the end, the reforms that might have saved the empire arrived decades too late. By the early 20th century, the financial consequences of centuries of warfare were undeniable. The empire had exhausted its treasury, its population, its economy, and its ability to recover. When World War I erupted, the Ottomans entered with a weakened financial backbone, relying almost entirely on German support. The war delivered the final blow, not because the empire lacked courage or armies, but because it lacked money. 600 years of near-constant conflict had created a structure that simply could not survive one more war. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire was not just a military defeat. It was the final bill of centuries of unsustainable warfare.